We'll be talking about Tanweer el Heiz, which is a solar energy project in El Bahariya Oasis, and we'll be meeting with one of the founders of this project right after the break. El Heiz is a village located 410 kilometers southwest of Cairo, 40 kilometers south of Bahariya Oasis, where 3,300 people living in 550 homes in 17 hamlets scattered within a 14 kilometers radius. The most interesting archaeological sites are an early Christian church dedicated to Saint George and Qasr Mas'ouda and the remains of Roman fortress. The Hayaziya people of El Heiz rely mainly on cultivating the land for income, and the main crops are dates, watermelon and figs. They sell the crop once a year and use the money all year round. Tanweer el Heiz is a project that aims at installing solar home systems in the village, funded by an international fund, an international bank, the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency, and one of the petroleum companies, and many individual donors. A group of Egyptian youth who belong to a reputable social club installed solar home systems for 59 families in El Heiz. Welcome back, and we're joined today by Laila Inawi, Tanweer el Heiz project officer. Thank you, Laila, for joining us.
Hello, Nikki. How are you?
Laila, would you tell me first about your education and your work, and then we will go to talk about Tanweer el Heiz and the solar energy project.
Of course. I studied agricultural business in Germany. And currently I work in development, in agricultural and rural development, usually in Upper Egypt.
Right.
Perhaps a little more about my studies. Agriculture is the backbone of Egypt, so this is one of the reasons I decided to study agriculture. Over 90% of Egyptians rely on agriculture for their daily bread. And when I studied agriculture, I liked the fact that it has a scientific background, but then when I continued my education, I saw the business side of agriculture, and this is where I took into the agribusiness side.
Right. Talking about agriculture and agriculture as a business, how do you think? How important is agriculture for Egypt, in your opinion?
In my opinion, Egypt has to build on agriculture. We have the Nile, and we have the soil, and we have the people. We have the sun and the weather. It's perfect for us to have agriculture as the backbone of this economy. And this is what I do this is where I work. I work in agricultural development in Upper Egypt specifically.
How can we develop agriculture in Egypt, in your opinion?
This is a very wide question. There are several things I think Egypt needs at this moment. Let's start by a very current issue, namely water. Let's work on more efficient use of water in Egypt. We don't have enough for us, so we need to teach farmers how to efficiently use their water resources.
So I think I guess we need to change our irrigation system.
We need partially to improve the systems, of course, but we need to raise awareness on farmers' level on the amount of water a plant needs, because we suffer sometimes from over-irrigation in some parts. On another
I think also there is using the sprinkle
for instance,
system.
using sprinklers, using drip irrigation. There are many modern irrigation systems, but even just reducing the amount of water with low technologies is possible at especially for small farmers level in Upper Egypt and the Delta, which obviously brings us to the next point. There are a lot of small farmers in Egypt, and this is a big issue. A lot of farmers have less than one fadan to live from, and the small-scale agriculture is not very efficient and effective in terms of economics, of course. So we need to teach the farmers and facilitate how they could work together in order to increase their economies of scale.
Right. We would like to move on to talk about social work, your activities in the line of social. When did you start social work? When you were young, or after you graduated?
Well, social work is part of my life since I was a child. In school, we were taught at school that social work is part of what we do. We were taught it in a very basic way. In Ramadan, we would each have to get a small Ramadan food supply bag to school and go donate it or distribute it to less privileged areas. This is where it started in school. In university, I continued as well with some organizations, university organizations doing social work. And then after I finished university, I joined a social club in order to pursue that.
Right.
In my family, we've been doing this for generations. My great-grandmother founded an NGO empowering women mainly. My grandmother is now the director of this NGO, and I'm a member there. So it sort of runs through generations in my family.
Right. So we'll now move to our main topic, which is solar energy. I would like you first to define for us what is solar energy.
Solar energy is in general all the energy that we can use that comes from the solar radiation of the sun. So mainly one differentiates between two different uses of this energy, namely using it for the production of electrical power, photovoltaic, or the use of the heat of the sun for several other technologies such as heating water. I think a lot of us are accustomed to solar water heaters and have seen them before.
Solar energy, of course, in Egypt is not something new. It has been, I mean, we have the sun, so we have the source. So how can we develop social energy in Egypt?
It's interesting to note that Egypt historically had one of the first solar plants planned in the world in the 1920s.
In the 1920s?
Yes, and somehow this didn't develop any further, and now the technology is mainly in other countries, but we have a lot of options to use solar energy in Egypt, starting with solar water heaters, which is one of the simplest technologies to use.
There has been a lot of talk about solar energy in Egypt for a very long time, but nothing has been implemented so far. Why, in your opinion?
Let's put it more concretely. There haven't been any huge major projects in solar energy, but there have been smaller initiatives in several villages across Egypt. The reason, of course, for the challenge of implementing solar energy is its high cost, especially when we talk about electrical power from solar energy. We are not the producers of this technology. We are mainly consumers of it. We have a few companies that build, for instance, the solar panels, but not a lot of them. So it's still fairly expensive, especially in view of the low electricity prices that we still have.
So solar energy costs a lot. It's expensive. Is it expensive in terms of the equipment itself?
The most expensive part of the solar energy is, of course, its equipment. And it comes along with, of course, we have to always compare it to the electrical cost of conventional electricity that is available. If our electricity cost from non-renewable sources increases, then solar energy will be more rentable with time.
So how do you think we can further develop solar energy in Egypt?
There are a lot of options to develop it, and let's start by the technology. We can start having the technology locally produced, which is a very valid option. We can look into subsidy or funding schemes for the private sector, for instance, to invest in this sector, or the private use of solar energy, and see how...
I think we have a video with us on your project.
Yes.
Would you tell us your comment on the video?
This was a project we implemented, we started last year. The idea came from a close friend of mine who is an engineer and studied solar and renewable energy. He's called Omar Hosni. He is a big fan of the desert, and when he first went, when on one of his visits to the desert, he was told, you have to go to the bathroom now because we don't have electricity anymore. So this was in Heiz. This is the village you're talking about.
Yes, I would like also to know, why did you choose this village in particular, El Heiz village? What was the main causes that you chose this specific area?
El Heiz was, as I was saying, the village where Omar was when suddenly the electricity cut and he didn't understand why. The reason why is that this village has a generator that works around 2-3 hours per day when there are no petrol shortages.
So they were living only on the generator?
They were living on the generator for around 2 hours per day when there were no petrol shortages. So this was obviously a challenge for them. And the reason why we chose Heiz was a more of a practical approach for them. And the reason why we chose Heiz was a more of a practical approach, because Omar knew the people in Heiz, so it was easy to talk to them, ask them what they need, see what the gaps are and where we can assist there.
The area you chose is very far from civilization, right?
Yes, El Heiz is around 40 kilometers from Bahariya Oasis, which is another 400 kilometers away from Cairo. There
are no facilities over there?
The closest facilities are in Bahariya Oasis, which is 40 kilometers away.
Did that make you worried or hesitant to start working over there?
It made our parents very hesitant to work over there, because we had to drive all the way. We were not always
sure.
So
you're driving back and forth? I mean, how frequent?
We would go on the weekends because we had to work during the week. So on weekends we would drive to Bahariya and install the panels and teach the people there how to install them themselves, and then return. And of course, sometimes this was a challenge for itself.
What are the main obstacles that would hinder a youth from participating in such projects?
I would say the main challenge is when we're talking about something like Bahariya, it's a bit the security issue when you're driving on such long deserted roads. But in other cases, I would say there are no challenges for youth to do something if they really want to do it.
Tell me about your first visit to this area, to El Heiz.
Our first visit was fairly comic, actually. It was in the middle of winter. I personally had never been to the desert before, and we were a bit briefed by Omar about what we're to expect. But nothing can prepare you to live 3 days without electricity. Your mobile is off because there's no network. And at night, it's just dark. And you see the thousands of stars there. And then you sit with the people and talk to the Hayaziya, who are perhaps the kindest people in this country. And you see how simple their life is, and yet very content.
Right, we'll just go for a short break and we'll be right back to continue our talk on El Heiz project. Welcome back, and back to our discussion on El Heiz project, which is a solar energy project. I would like to know what were the main obstacles you had and where did you generate funding from?
Um, the first fund came from the Canadian government. We applied for the funding through the NGO. We wrote the proposal and had the idea and gave it to them. And then they called and asked us, why are you only lighting up 8 houses? And then we had to reply and say, because this was the ceiling for your fund. And then they said, this is such a good innovative project. Let's double the funding and see what happens. So this was the first funding. And when we started implementing the project, other funding sources came up, like international banks, NGOs, the petroleum companies, and a lot of individuals wanted to contribute, as well as a lot of volunteers were then involved in the project.
How about the teams? How were the teams formed, and where was your position among those teams?
Teams were formed through our club. We would organize it a week or 2 weeks ahead that we are going to Heiz to install the panels. And then we would see which volunteers are available. Word of mouth was of great importance in that regard. And we would just organize the visit to Heiz for installation. Omar would brief us on how to install them, because a lot of us are not engineers. So we had to learn how this is done before we do it ourselves.
How about how did the project develop and progress?
It started first as a very small project. As I said, the plan was for 8 houses at the beginning. Then it progressed to become 62 to date. It is complemented by another project currently that assures its sustainability, that works on water purification, solar water purification, so using solar energy to purify water, because this was another challenge in Heiz. And also to line the channels there in Heiz to assist agriculture and reduce water losses as well.
Would you like to comment on some of these photos?
This is us learning on how to install the panels and installing them with the Hayazea themselves in Heiz. This is the celebration they did for us at the end of the first phase, where they gathered all their musicians to celebrate the light in their houses. And Heiz is very close to Farafra, for instance, and the White Desert as well, so it's somewhere in between. And we learned a lot about our country during this project a lot.
How was the response of the people living there to all what you're doing for them?
Children were extremely curious. In some of the cases, when the operations were easy enough, we would let them assist us in installing. The grown-ups in the village, especially, for instance, the village electrician, received a full training on how to install these panels and maintain the system through our suppliers as well. And now he is an expert in solar system installation. And the older generation, we're talking about the seniors in Heiz, they were so overwhelmed with suddenly having 24 hours of electricity. They would sometimes, in the midst of an evening gathering, tell the whole family, that's it, go sit in the dark, it's enough electricity for one day, because they were so surprised of having it 24 hours a day. While others would just turn on the TV for 24 hours because they hadn't had the chance ever to watch TV for 24 hours. Children, on the other hand, now are able to study at night, which wasn't possible before the project. They had to help their parents in the field during the day, and then at night there wasn't enough light for them to study.
Is funding one of the main obstacles in having similar projects?
Funding is perhaps an obstacle, but when you have a good project and a good idea and you know how to present it properly, you usually find someone who wants to fund it.
What are the most common and smooth solutions to find funding, someone to provide funding?
Keep an eye for it. A lot of institutions and agencies want to fund development projects and community development projects, especially when it's involved some kind of innovation, especially when youth are implementing it for their own country. And just ask. Sometimes we just forget to ask.
In addition to funding, what are the main obstacles that can face such projects?
Sometimes it's the technology. Sometimes you really don't know what you need, but what we learned from Heiz is sometimes you need to ask the people what they need. A small anecdote perhaps, when we were doing the research in the beginning, asking the women what they think they need for their household, we asked them a simple question, whether they would prefer to have a washing machine or a fridge or a freezer, and they were very keen and unanimously said we want a fridge or a freezer to store food, which is more important, while we prefer washing in the local waterways because it's a social event, so don't take away our social event. So it's very important to ask the people what they want, what they need, and how they perceive it.
Right. Usually red tape and official approvals are one of the obstacles. How did you manage with this?
We were very lucky. The local city council was aware of what we were doing, and they were very supportive in terms of implementation.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't have to face any obstacles regarding official approvals?
No, not at all. The project is in line with most of the rules and regulations that are required for such a project, so it was fairly smooth and simple to implement it.
Mm-hmm. What are your plans for the future in terms of social work?
This project is continuing. We hope it continues until all 550 homes have electrical power supply. Mm-hmm. We're hoping that other people build on this idea and replicate it in other villages that require the same sort of interventions. Mm. And we are currently, another project is building actually on this project, as I said, working more on the water issue in the village, and in working on agriculture now that one problem is more or less solved and one is in the making. They are working on agriculture. They're promoting, for instance, protected agriculture using greenhouses or covered houses to increase productivity and have other crops outside of the season or with a prolonged season there.
Mm-hmm. Right, Laila Inawi, Tanweer el Heiz project officer, thank you very much for your input, and we wish you all the best, of course.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. With this, we wrap up this edition of Today's Youth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile International.